he found her dying in the snow on what should have been the happiest day of her life. She was still wearing the wedding dress when Julian found her collapsed outside his gates. The fabric had turned grey from the slush, the delicate lace torn at the hem where she'd clearly been running. Her lips held a blue tint that made Julian's chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in years. Genuine fear for another person's life. He knelt beside her, his expensive coat soaking through at the knees, and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. The pulse was there, faint but steady. "Get the physician," Julian barked at his groundskeeper. "Now!" He didn't wait for a response. Julian gathered the unconscious woman into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. The wedding gown was elaborate, the kind that cost more than most families earned in a year, but it was soaked through and provided no warmth. As he carried her toward Ravenswood Manor, her head lolled against his shoulder, and he caught the scent of orange blossoms mixed with something sharper. Fear, perhaps. Julian Mercer had not touched another person with tenderness in 3 years. Not since the trial. Not since his name had been dragged through every London drawing room as the man who destroyed the Hargrove family fortune. The Duke of Ravenswood had become synonymous with cruelty, with calculated revenge, with the kind of cold-blooded business dealings that left men ruined and their daughters without futures. And yet here he was, cradling a stranger in a wedding dress, his heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The servants scattered when he kicked open the main doors. Mrs. Caldwell, his housekeeper, was the first to recover. "The blue room," Julian commanded, already moving toward the stairs. "Hot water, blankets, and every dry towel in this house. Now." He laid the woman on the 4-poster bed, his movements careful despite the urgency thundering through his veins. In the lamplight, he could see her face properly for the first time. She was young, perhaps 23, with dark hair that had fallen loose from its elaborate styling. There was a bruise forming along her left cheekbone, purple and angry against pale skin. Someone had struck her. This wasn't from a fall. This was from a closed fist. The physician arrived within the hour and worked in silence. After what felt like an eternity, he straightened. "She'll live," but it was a near thing. Another hour in that cold and we'd be having a very different conversation. He paused. "She's been beaten. The bruising on her face and torso is significant." After the doctor left, Julian found himself alone with the sleeping stranger. That's when he noticed the wedding ring on her left hand. The engraving was unmistakable. 3 interlocking serpents, the crest of the Hargrove family. The very family he'd destroyed. Julian walked to the window. 3 years ago, he'd used every legal and financial weapon at his disposal to dismantle Richard Hargrove's empire. The man had betrayed Julian's father in a business deal that led to the elder Mercer's death, a heart seizure brought on by the stress of sudden bankruptcy. Julian had been methodical in his revenge. He'd bought up debts, called in favours, ensured every door in London closed in Hargrove's face. But he'd never intended for it to touch Hargrove's daughter. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, knowing he should leave but unable to make himself do it. If this was Eleanor Hargrove, if his revenge had somehow led to this moment, then he owed her more than medical care. He owed her truth. But more than that, Julian realized something that terrified him. He wanted to know her story, not as the daughter of his enemy, but as the woman brave enough to run into a winter storm in a wedding dress, rather than face whatever waited for her at the altar. Eleanor Hargrove woke to the smell of lavender and beeswax. Pain bloomed across her ribs like fire through dry kindling, and she knew with certainty that the dead felt nothing. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to soft morning light filtering through velvet curtains. The room was unfamiliar, too grand to be an inn, too personal to be a hospital. "You're awake?" The voice came from her left, deep and measured. She turned her head and found herself looking at a man who seemed carved from granite. He sat in a leather chair beside her bed, dark hair falling across a face that was handsome in the way of sharp things. Cutting cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of slate before a storm. "Where am I?" "Ravenswood Manor, my estate. You collapsed in the snow outside my gates last night." The name struck her like a physical blow. Julian Mercer, the Duke of Ravenswood, the man who destroyed her father. "I see you recognize the name," he said. "I know the ring you wear, but not the woman wearing it." "Eleanor," she whispered. "Eleanor Hargrove." He merely nodded, as though confirming something he'd already suspected. Which begs the question, what were you running from so desperately that you chose a winter storm over your own wedding? "I wasn't running from the wedding," Eleanor said finally. "I was running from my husband." Something changed in Julian's face, a hardening around the eyes. "Baron Ashcroft has particular ideas about obedience. I disagreed with one of them. He felt it necessary to educate me on my duties as his wife." She paused. He'd been drinking since dawn, said it was his right to discipline his wife, that my father assured him I was compliant. When I objected, he struck me. During the wedding breakfast, in front of everyone. "And your father?" "My father told him to do whatever was necessary to make me obedient, that I'd always been too headstrong, that Ashcroft had his full blessing to break me of such habits." The silence that followed was absolute. Julian stood abruptly, pacing to the window with the coiled energy of a predator in a cage. "So you ran?" "I ran. I waited until Ashcroft was drunk and bragging to his friends about the wedding night. I walked out the servants' entrance and kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay." "You could have frozen to death." "It seemed preferable to the alternative." Julian turned from the window. "Your father sold you to a monster to pay his debts. Baron Ashcroft offered a generous settlement, enough to keep my father from prison. All he wanted was a wife with an acceptable name and the understanding that I would ask no questions." "Why did you bring me inside?" Eleanor asked. "Why not simply send me away?" "Because leaving a woman to die in the snow isn't revenge. It's murder." "Just a destroyer of families, then?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Julian laughed. "Harsh and empty." "Yes, I destroyed your father's empire. I used every connection I possessed to see Richard Hargrove ruined. And I would do it again." "Why? What did my father do to earn such hatred?" Pain crossed Julian's face, old and deep. "He killed my father. They were partners. They'd built an empire together. Then your father decided he wanted it all. He forged documents, manipulated ledgers, convinced investors my father was embezzling. The scandal destroyed him. He had a seizure in his study 3 weeks later. I found him collapsed beside his desk. He died in my arms." Eleanor gripped the blankets to steady herself. Her father, capable of such cruelty. But she thought of how easily he'd handed her to Ashcroft, how little he'd cared when his new son-in-law struck his daughter at her own wedding. Perhaps she'd never really known her father at all. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." They sat in silence, two people bound together by revenge and circumstance. "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. Julian met her eyes. Now you tell me everything about Baron Ashcroft. Every detail, every cruelty, every secret. I built my reputation on destroying men who deserve it. Your husband just became my new project. And what do you want in return? Julian paused at the door, looking back with eyes that held secrets and promises in equal measure. The truth, Eleanor Hargrove. Every lie your father told, every manipulation, every hidden sin. I destroyed his fortune, but I never touched his most precious possession. His daughter, Eleanor whispered. His daughter. And now his daughter is going to help me finish what I started. The door closed behind him, leaving Eleanor alone with the weight of impossible choices. She had run from one monster, only to strike a bargain with another. And somewhere, in the cold chambers of her bruised heart, she found she didn't care. 3 weeks passed. She told Julian everything in careful conversations held in his study, while winter storms battered the windows and fires crackled in the hearths. She told him about her father's gambling debts, the servants dismissed without references, her mother's jewelry sold piece by piece until nothing remained but shame and empty velvet boxes. And Julian listened. But something unexpected happened during those conversations. Between the revelations, Eleanor discovered the man behind the Duke's cold reputation. She learned he played piano, though he claimed he'd forgotten how. She discovered he took his coffee black because his father had, a small ritual of remembrance. She found a sharp wit buried beneath layers of composure, and when he truly laughed, it transformed his entire face into something warm. Julian, for his part, seemed to be discovering something too. Eleanor caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded. When she played chess with him, he smiled at her strategies. When she argued about literature, he engaged rather than dismissed. When she walked the frost-covered gardens, he appeared at her side as though simply passing by, though they both knew the gardens weren't on the way to anywhere. On the 21st morning, Julian summoned her to his study. Documents lay spread across his oak desk. It's done. Baron Ashcroft has been exposed. His adultery, his gambling debts, his 3 mistresses, all documented. The evidence is enough to grant you an annulment on grounds of fraud. The paperwork is filed. His reputation is destroyed. His debts are being called in. He paused. You're free, Eleanor. And my father? I've made it known exactly what kind of man Richard Hargrove truly is. His days of influence are finished. Thank you, she said quietly. I know I have no right to your help given my family's crimes. You have every right. You're not responsible for your father's sins. You have no sins, Eleanor said. You sought justice for your father. That's not the same. Julian's laugh was bitter. I destroyed your family knowing it would hurt innocent people. I told myself it was justice, but revenge and justice aren't always the same thing. Eleanor stepped closer, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. In 3 weeks, this man had become familiar in ways that should have taken years. She knew the weight of his grief and the careful control he maintained over everything. And she knew with sudden clarity that she didn't want to leave. What if justice and revenge could become something else entirely? She said slowly. Eleanor. Her name on his lips sounded like a warning and a promise. Don't confuse gratitude for something more. You're free. You can rebuild anywhere. What if I want to stay? Not because of revenge or debt, but because these 3 weeks have been the first time I felt like myself since my father's fall. Because you listen when I speak. Because you make me laugh. Because when I think about leaving Ravenswood, about never seeing you again, it feels like walking back into that storm. You barely know me. But Julian's hand had risen to cup her face, his thumb gentle against the fading bruise on her cheek. I know enough. I know you're a good man who did a terrible thing for the right reasons. I know that somewhere between revenge and redemption, we found something neither of us was looking for. And what's that? His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. A second chance. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like Eleanor had expected. Not demanding, but questioning, asking permission with every gentle pressure. Julian kissed her like she was something precious, and Eleanor felt 3 years of cold isolation crack and fall away like ice in spring. When they finally pulled apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said simply. Not as an obligation. Stay because you want to. Stay and let me spend the rest of my life proving that revenge can become something better. Eleanor smiled, truly smiled for the first time in longer than she could remember. Yes. One word, but it contained multitudes. Yes to staying. Yes to second chances. Yes to the terrifying possibility of happiness after loss. 6 months later, Eleanor Hargrove became Eleanor Mercer in a small ceremony attended by friends who understood that the best marriages were built on truth. They honeymooned in Italy, where Julian taught her to play piano, and she taught him to let go of control long enough to dance in the rain. When they returned to Ravenswood Manor, it was no longer a fortress of isolation, but a home filled with laughter and music, and the kind of love that grows from choosing each other every single day. The Duke had found his enemy's bride dying in the cold and made a choice no one expected, including himself. He'd chosen forgiveness over revenge, love over hatred, and in doing so, found the one thing his carefully constructed plans had never accounted for. He found home.